So we are going to focus on how to use Teams to transform learning in your school. We appreciate it's been particularly challenging at the moment with the extra complexities that we face in education, and Turn It On are running this webinar to understand how you can get more out of Microsoft Teams, but also then how you could use that to support remote learning in the school. One of the benefits you're going to get from joining this afternoon's webinar, let me just pause that video, is that you will be able to become a MIE by the end of this session. That's a Microsoft Innovative Educator. One thing I need you to do is go to the Microsoft Education Center. So if you went onto the internet and you open up a web browser and in the search engine you type Microsoft Education Center, in the very top right hand corner where the fingers are pointing on the slide there, it will say sign in. If you've already got an account, please could you sign in for me? If you haven't got an account, I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to go make one so that when we come to the appropriate points during the presentation, you can redeem the code that's on screen and you will automatically get an MIE accreditation just by joining this session now and everything you're about to learn about Microsoft Teams. So we're just going to pause for a minute or two while everyone goes and gets signed into the Microsoft Education Center. If you've got any problems with that, feel free to unmute Mike and ask me. I'll be here in the background, but I'll just give you a couple of minutes to go and join up now.
Yes.
For those people just joining, we are just going to join up to the Microsoft Education Center so that everybody can redeem the codes from today's session. One of the benefits of coming along today is that you can become a certified Microsoft Innovative Educator. So if you could just go to a web browser and navigate to the Microsoft Education Center and then sign in with your school account or another account if you've already got one, and then I will give you the code later on in this session to redeem. Give you one more minute to get that finished and then we'll move on in the session. Okay, we'll continue on with this afternoon's training. The benefits of becoming an MIE is great for you, but it's also fantastic for the school. You can undertake development, so there are lots of different courses or learning pathways on the MEC or the Microsoft Education Center. You will get awarded points and also badges. Those badges are also printable certificates, qualification certificates. And what you need is 1,000 points. So today we are going to gift you 1,000 points because you will learn everything that's equivalent to the 1,000 points of study that you would have completed on the courses around using Teams. So by the end of the day, you'll be an MIE like on the left, but also if you decide that you really are passionate about understanding more about how to get the most out of Office 365 and how it can work for your school, you can then apply to become an MIE expert. That involves you putting in an application, so you have to submit a SWAY to Microsoft, and then you can get accredited if you are successful in passing the course at the end. If you really think it's something that you're passionately interested in, you can always try to drive your school towards being a showcase school, and we're running some sessions around that later on in the year. You could also have the option to get other qualifications, so you can become an MIE trainer or you can be an MIE fellow, and there's pathways that help to develop you as an individual, but would also help to enrich the knowledge and the skills in the school, and also ultimately the offering that you have for the staff, but the pupils, students too. So what we're going to focus on this afternoon is going to be, as I said, using Teams for that transformation of education in the distance learning scenario and remote connection with staff, but also with pupils or students too. We'll have a discussion around group devices versus one-to-one devices in the classroom, but also at home. Explore the blended and remote learning scenarios that we might be coming across, and then we'll delve more into Teams itself and how you can use it to deliver those remote learning sessions. And we'll have a look at how to use things like stream and video recording and meetings. We'll explore how to get the most out of the post section, and then if you're adding files into those, how they're made available for people in those teams. And then for class teams, we'll finish off having a look at how assignments can be used to help you track progress and assessments. One of the questions I often get asked initially is, well, that's all very well and good using Teams for remote learning, but how on earth can people get to it? The great news is that Teams is available on pretty much any device that you're going to have in school, and also that pupils may be using at home for remote learning sessions if they've had to isolate their bubbles out of school, or maybe you're in a local lockdown scenario. One of the things that I would advise doing, if you haven't already, is surveying your parents to understand the range of devices you've got at home, who might have access to a device. Are there two siblings in the same household, so therefore they're going to be vying for the time with that? And if they're in different year groups in your school, how's that going to work for them to get access to the learning you're setting? And also it helps you to understand, well, are we going to need to give those parents any additional support or guidance because we suddenly realize they've got a lot of old obscure devices where it might be a bit more of a difficult step to get through. Although you can get there, it might not be covered in some of the modern guides. So having that understanding, you know the demographics in your area, but just understanding what you are facing with devices at home is also really helpful to having a successful learning experience, particularly around remote learning when you may not be there with that person and you're trying to explain something to them over an email or another call, and it's not always the easiest scenarios. With Microsoft Teams, you can get it on a Windows computer, and you can also have it on a Apple Mac as well if you've got one of those. Both of those devices have installable apps, and you've also then got the option to have it open on a web browser. The web browsers that work best are the new Microsoft Edge browser, and that's the Chromium version, not the old version. So it's got like the turquoise E as opposed to the old blue E. The Chrome browser is very stable and good for that, and if you're using a Mac, Safari is now out of preview, and that's a stable browser to use on Macs. If you've got pupils that are using or accessing Teams from home on tablet devices or phones, the good news is that most people obviously use a Android tablet or a iOS iPad tablet. There's dedicated apps for both those tablets and both those phones, but certainly on the tablets as well, you could use a tab and a web browser on the device and Teams would run in there. The display is quite uniform across all the devices. The app has one or two more features compared to the web browser, but they're not anything critical that would stop you successfully engaging in distance learning, and it just means that you've got peace of mind that you aren't making it difficult for the pupils or the students to get in, or staff to remotely connect if they need to from home. With Teams, it's an ever-evolving piece of software, and the platform itself has seen a lot of improvements through the summer, and it continues into the autumn. We started out with a grid view for meetings, and that was expanded into a 3x3 and recently a 7x7 grid. But if you want to then branch out and get rid of the grid view, you can have something called Together Mode, and Together Mode is a bit like a lecture theatre where you're stood at the front on a stage or a lectern, and then everyone will be sat around you in seats. It's quite nice for pastoral activities with pupils because all of a sudden it gets rid of that formality of them seeing thumbnails and grids and squares. I can show you where that is in a little bit when we come to show you the Teams demo itself. You can now also have Teams meetings as a custom window, so you can change to the new meetings view. That stops you having to have the one display with the bar across the middle, which some of you might have, and then that dominates the rest of Teams. Well, you don't have to put up with that any longer. You can have a separate window, and that makes it far easier for you to navigate what's going on in other areas in Teams while you're still on a Teams call or in a Teams meeting. The participant numbers have increased significantly. I had a few schools that were trying to use Teams for things like assemblies, whole school assemblies in primary schools, or year group assemblies, or year group meetings in secondaries. And it was a real pain that the 250 limit sometimes prevented that being a successful exercise, and you had to then split your year groups in half and so forth. Well, in most cases, 300 people in a Teams meeting will now suit that. I appreciate we've got some larger establishments here in some secondary schools with us too, so you may need to think about how you're going to break those down, but the 300 limit is now there, and that's better. We've also gained a better insight into what's going on in class Teams, so the class insights tab, and I can also show you that in a tick, will let you know about usage and metrics. It's a bit like Microsoft Power BI for anyone that's already using that. It's got graphs, it's got tables of information. Coming soon as well, you'll have breakout rooms. They're supposed to be arriving at the end of October, and I know some people have already been previewing those. That means that if you're having a meeting and you all need to then split off and discuss other topics, you can do that. It could be that you're having a governors meeting because you're getting your community together. It could be that you're an academy and actually there's a central trust team, and what you need to do is then meet with different people in that trust team. Well, instead of you all having to wait for your turn in the main meeting and maybe sitting there through less relevant parts, you could start off and have the meeting at the beginning so that everyone's together, they got all the important inputs and messages, and then they go and break out to their separate rooms and you come back together at the end. If you do go to a breakout room, it means you will leave and stop being present in the main meeting. And if you are moderating that, when you go from the main meeting into the different breakout rooms, you will move from room to room, so you won't stay in the original meeting. So it's something to be mindful of in how you structure those and how you use your time. To get some of those features, it does mean that you'll need to enable the new meetings mode, and I'll show you how to do that. I often also get asked, well, why Teams? What's so special about it? How is it going to work, particularly for this distance remote learning? It's a platform where you bring everything together in one digital hub, and the person using it doesn't have to worry about going elsewhere and roaming around and trying to have different tabs open on a browser or go to other areas of the Teams app. It's all just confined in one window. So with that one window, you can cover the teaching and learning aspects of the school. You could also engage in professional development with staff or trust teams or local authorities. You've got great scope to build community, and that's either community with pupils and students, but also community with staff. And you've got strength too in the fact that you can continue to coordinate the running of the school. You can plan strategies. You can make sure that, okay, we've got a lot of time taken up with COVID, but if we've got a vision for the school or a development plan and we still need to make sure that's driving forwards, you can still use Teams as a vehicle to achieve that and get everybody involved, whether they are self-isolating at home or whether they're in school but can't be in the same bubble. You can have those meaningful meetings still and get everybody together virtually, and it doesn't have to be a barrier that they can't come into the same room or the same area of the building. Or if you've got a split site, it means people can get together really easily without having to travel between them. So there's lots and lots of scope to use Teams as that amazing single digital hub to unite everyone for a whole range of purposes. It also means that it connects together a lot of your different software and platforms around the school. As you can see on the left there, it connects into most of the other Office 365 apps. And even if they aren't natively there, you've got the option to add apps in. It replaces potentially a lot of other functions that are in at the moment, other pieces of software. So you can have one-to-one chats, you can create your teams, is the whole nature of this platform. But you've got down the bottom other specialist bits of educational software that are available to you. OneNote in itself, which we're going to do a session on for the next MIE session next week, it is amazing. And OneNote Class Notebook in class teams is transformational in the way that you can suddenly deliver learning content. You've got other associated platforms too. Flipgrid is one of the other sessions we're going to be covering for the MIE. That's very much around pupil voice and understanding assessment and tracking the progress in that assessment. But you've got the third-party applications that you might subscribe to. So you might be a secondary and you regularly use Kahoot for questions in classrooms. Well, that's great, because now Kahoot can be pinned inside of Teams, and students don't need to go opening up even the Kahoot companion app or going off to another tab in the web browser. You can have Kahoot pinned inside of your team, so you don't need to go elsewhere. There's a selection of platforms there, and that is by no means exhaustive, and there are more being added all the time. So there's lots of other companies, third-party companies, that are partnering with Microsoft, so that if you are in a distance learning scenario, again, that simplicity of one place is there for you, so you don't get overwhelmed if you're a pupil at home trying to navigate this, or if you're a parent trying to support your pupil or your student. You just get there and you find everything's pinned across the tabs at the top, and it's all neat and tidy, and you haven't got to worry about locating something or it's disguised and hidden somewhere. With the community and communication, we are going to look at how we just build using the different features that we have, and they will allow us to achieve different outcomes, whether we're trying to bring together the whole school community, as I said earlier, for assemblies or acts of worship, if we're a faith school, also just delivering the business of schools, which is the day-to-day teaching and learning, but not forgetting that people are under a lot of pressure, and you always had pastoral support, but they may be even more important now. They could be a very big driver for mental well-being, and if someone's isolated or you've got a bubble of pupils outside, and yes, they might talk to each other on their own social media platforms, but there may occasionally be some that find it difficult to engage with their peers using that, and some of their contact might come just through Teams in the school. So having the mental well-being and the power, I would also say, is really key for one of your features in Teams, and I'll talk about that again in a little bit. But you could also use it to strengthen your staff team too. So without any further delay, I'm going to jump out of the presentation, I'm going to stop sharing that screen, and I'm going to move over to share another screen. I'm also going to have a pause point, and has anybody got any questions at this specific juncture and they want to ask? Feel free to unmute, pop them in the chat. I'm happy to talk either way. Nope. Okay. Right, you should now see a set of teams that I'm sharing with you. And I won't dip into all of these this afternoon, as it is in UK time. But as you can see, there's quite a different range of ways that you can bring different groups of people into the Teams environment. Staff are really key. And the way that we set it, we turn it on and work with Microsoft, is that you'd have a single staff team and you'd then subdivide that staff team up. If you're working with class teams, here I've got an example of a class team in a primary and a secondary, but it tends to be that you would, in a primary school, have a class team per physical team in your school, and that in secondary you might divide that up in a different way. So there's lots of ways of doing it in secondary, but one of the common ways that I work with schools in is having a class team per subject. And then when you go into your class team, I know I've got mixed classes down the side, but you can have then within your subject, if this just was English or science, down here would be all of your different sets as different channels. So you might have year 7 set 1, year 7 set 2, year 7 set 3. The teachers can navigate in between, but the students just see the ones that are relevant for them. So the channels are subdividers inside of your teams. Other uses for teams are having governing bodies involved, or you can have a central trust channel as well. And if you're having governors meetings, sometimes there's really expensive platforms you might subscribe to. Well, you can consider whether you can wean yourself off of those and start to use Teams instead. In here, I tend to use the general channel for the whole governors meetings or whole governor communications, and posts go in here, so as you can see, important, or there's a governors meeting coming up tonight. And then I have all the subcommittees as different channels down the side. It means that that distance communication with the governing body is really easy to achieve because they get used to coming into Teams after a while. But any information they need or any important notices they need doesn't have to necessarily go on emails anymore. It could go in posts in here. They can still get notified by an email as well, but they don't have to just stick to staying by having documents attached to an email, and then they might get lost, or they could get downloaded locally and there could be a GDPR or a data compliance issue. You've got your different groups in here. And if you needed to access central trust resources, I've got a lot of trusts that we work with that now have central trust teams, and if you tap into, you're the business manager for the school and you need to meet with the finance representatives at the trust, you can have that set up. Or if you need to generally pick up trust policies or procedural guidance or risk assessments, all of that could be there. So that although you couldn't necessarily go to meetings at trust offices, or you couldn't go and visit a person as you would have done physically, you've still got that access to them, or you could branch out and have a meeting with them inside the relevant channel. So there's lots of ways to structure the various teams that you're going to be involved in and make sure that they connect with you in a distance manner, but they don't have to be distance in their engagement with you. I am going to just first of all talk about the getting the notifications and your settings set up in your meeting mode as you want them. I would say up here in the corner, you've got a settings options. If you haven't found them, you click on your name up there in the top right hand corner and you click settings. And then here in the bottom in the general, you should have an option that isn't available to me today, but it will say something like new meeting mode, and I'll have a clickable box like that. So if you turn on the new meeting mode, you will get a pop-out meeting window, and you'll also get all those new meetings features like together mode, where you can have people in a lecture theatre and those choices of the grids. And that's really useful for moving forwards, making sure you can make the most of Teams and also be able to multitask. One of the other things that people often need to get sorted when they're using Teams for distance learning or remote learning is that you need to get notifications in a way that suits you. If I was a classroom teacher, I may not want my messages scrolling across the screen as just a banner, so I would drop it down and I would choose different options in there. So I might say that I just want any sort of replies to conversations to be off, because I don't want them coming in on the side of the screen and students seeing them when I'm teaching or reading something they shouldn't be privy to. So you've got to set those up so that they suit you, and it's better that they're done by the individual and their role within a school or an organisation, rather than being set centrally by somebody that administrates Office 365 or looks after the Teams admin centre in the back end. If we went into staff teams first, in staff teams, and I know I've got a variation of people here that have used Teams before, so I'll very quickly just cover where to find things. Down the left hand side here, you've got the options to navigate around the key features in Teams that you would use for remote learning. So activity will always tell you what's been going on. So you can see here in my demo version, there's not been so much activity in this class, in this staff team. There's been a little bit of interaction. Chat is for private chat. This works a bit like a social media platform. You can either have one-to-one chat, and that might be with another individual in your organization, or you can have chats in small groups. So you can see here I've got a demo account and a colleague that I work with, and I'm going to start off a chat where I want to check that someone's available for a catch-up later. Then here is where you get to those teams that I showed you earlier. Assignments we'll come back to. Calendar is really good for organising those meetings, and I will start there in a moment. In calls, if you want to, Teams can be used for telephony. So if you've got at the moment copper phones, or you've got a different phone system, there is the functionality to use Teams for voice calls, but we aren't going to labour that today. If we went back to calendars, one of the first questions I have is, well, okay, I've got either a class out and I need to have them set up to work with them, and I'm going to be in a blended learning scenario, or I've got some of pupils in my class that are working from home, they're waiting for COVID tests or they're self-isolating. I've got 20 of the class in front of me and 10 of them at home and they're going to be working on devices. How on earth do I still make sure that the blended learning is successful? And one of the first things to evaluate is, well, do we want to use live lessons and meetings, or do we, for safeguarding reasons or policies in our school, want to pre-record content, and the people working at home in that blended learning situation, or even if they were all at home in a full remote learning situation, are they going to watch a pre-recorded video, or are they going to get an event invite where they come, such as subject meeting for English and maths, and they join a meeting that's then a live broadcast with the teacher? You need to decide what's right for you as a school, and Teams will let you do any of those, but it's just a matter of whether you want to or feel comfortable to, or your school, your academy, or your trust think that it's appropriate to do so, use the live meeting feature. You can decide to have an impromptu meet now, and as a member of staff, if you are using a web browser like I'm in this version, in the demo I'm using the browser rather than the app, you need to make sure that you allow access to your camera and also your microphone. I'm just going to disallow that for today. And if you don't permit that, you can always change those permissions by pressing the padlock up there, and then you go into site permissions and you change them and press allow afterwards. Some of the most common complaints that I get from staff when they use this is, well, my camera didn't work, my microphone didn't work, and it's often because they haven't allowed it here. It's also a frequent question I get when I'm working with pupils in a remote situation because they can't get in, and that's one of the reasons they often can't get in. But once they've solved that once and they're aware of it, it's not a barrier anymore. I'm going to continue with that audio. So if I went to meet now, I might say this is going to be, let's say, Year 6 English, and then I would just press join now. I won't do it because it's going to cut me off and I'll jump into another meeting and I'll leave your meeting, and I don't want to leave you on your own here. But once you're in there and you're in that meet now, from the calendar point of view, you need to manually add people in. If it's just a small group you're working with, because maybe you've got a bubble of pupils that are self-isolating at home and you are in that blended learning situation, that can work quite well. Some schools are scheduling the bubbles from home to join the bubbles in school during the same period. Others are saying, no, when the teacher isn't in class, we'll give them designated time to work with those bubbles at home. And again, that's a discussion for what you want to do as an organisation and whether it's going to suit you. The other better way to set things up, so say on Friday at 10 o'clock in the morning, I want to have my English class. So it's going to be Oak class, and I am going to have maths. I invite my attendees here, so I'm just going to invite my demo pupils, and I'm going to pop them in there. You invite your 30 pupils. If you've already got groups, so you've set up groups for your particular year groups or your classes, that's neater and quicker, and from a staff workload point of view, it's more efficient. You set your time, so it's going to be a 1 hour lesson. You can in here give a description of what they need to do in the lesson. You could embed things such as websites you're going to use. You can put in text to give them a description of what to expect to join. You can also assign it to a channel and a team. So if I wanted my primary pupils to be aware of this, I'm going to make a post. It's going to go into their general channel. You don't have to attach the meeting to a team channel, but that way it ties in the notifications. And if you aren't in class to hear the teacher say, don't forget at 10 o'clock, we're going to be doing maths, or they aren't able to look at the board at the front and see the flow of the day from cards that you put on the wall, it's one of those other communication mechanisms to make sure that they know, they feel included, they know what's going on at a certain time, they know they need to be ready so they can get access to the device. And when you're ready to do that, you press send, and it will calendar that for you for tomorrow morning. And then up here, if I scroll up, it's being built at the moment because a little cog that's whirring around in the bottom corner there. But then when you're ready and it gets closer to the time, you press the join button there, or you can click from your team and you can join from there. So There's lots of different ways to get those distance learning lessons set up. If you are in a meeting and, like I'm doing currently, you are recording, the recording button can be accessed from the meetings bar, either in the middle of the screen at the bottom, or it can also be accessed at the top. I'm just going to stop sharing that screen, and I'm going to share the screen that I am meeting you from, just so that you can see that. And I'll jump back in. This is the new meeting view where you've got the bar at the top, and then in here in the middle you've got a recording button. If you are the owner of the meeting, you will be able to record, and when you record the meeting you can then add that back into a team later on, whether it's a staff team, trust team, governors team, or a class team, and that could be for the purpose of giving distance learning input. It could be that you want to have that as a piece of content they access and watch during the lesson. There's various different ways to use the recording feature, but it's there, and it records into something called Microsoft Stream, which is the Office 365 place for storage of video recordings. But you can build your own channels in there, you can organize your videos, but more importantly you can pull the videos back out of there and then put them back into Teams at the same time. I mentioned earlier about the new meeting feature, so there is the gallery feature, and if we had more participants in here we could add in the large gallery view. If I popped you in together mode, it would reorganize you, or it should reorganize you there, and then you would all be sat around me if you had your cameras on in seats there in the lecture theatre, so I would be able to see you all facing me, which is a friendlier view for things. Maybe you want to do your lessons like that. There you go. So someone's joined me. Hello, nice to see you. I should unmute my camera at this point because you actually haven't seen me yet. And I might say, hello, I'm here as well. And you can then all start to see each other. It's quite a friendly way of doing things. And it's far less threatening, particularly if you've got nervous pupils and maybe mental well-being is actually a big issue with some of those pupils. It's a lot less threatening to be in that environment, and it feels more of a friendly, relaxed atmosphere. You're obviously going to get on with the business of education, but at the same time, you know you've got that rapport with the students in your class. You know how to get the best out of them, and if that's something they'll respond to, then it is a good tool to have in your arsenal. I'm going to put us back to boring old gallery mode now so you can see there. Also on the bar in the middle, just mentioning it in passing, and you've probably had to play around with this, but applying background effects are really good for distance learning and remote learning scenarios too. Okay, at the moment I've got some boring ones, and I've got the traditional office environments because it looks professional, particularly when you're giving webinars, but you've got all the good old Microsoft default backgrounds in there. But you could add in other backgrounds. So I was working, if I mute my camera, I was working with a group of pupils in year 6. And in year 6, we decided we were going to be doing some storytelling. And if I apply that, we decided we were going to weave in Star Wars. So all of a sudden, I'm there in a Death Star, or in the UK, for those people that are from the UK. We also had another group I was working with, and they wanted to do Doctor Who as a vehicle for storytelling. So we imagined we were in the TARDIS and we were arriving at different locations in time and space. And we put together our story and our piece of creative writing from that perspective. I didn't have any of them with me whatsoever, but as I came back each time on a live video, I looked different. So I dressed up in different costumes. One time I had a Tom Baker scarf on. The other time I was dressed up as a figure from history. I had like a Roman helmet on and a tabard. And it's just a way to make it quite enjoyable and mix it up a bit. So it doesn't have to be these boring backgrounds for meetings like these. It can be that it can be useful for an educational context as well. I don't think there's anything else in there I need to cover with you at the moment, and I will swap my sharing screen back over to Teams. Anybody got any questions at this point? I've often spoken about quite a few different bits and pieces there, or an insight into how you're using some of those features in your schools. Silence. Okay, I'll carry on. Don't be shy. If you think you've got something really good to share, please do unmute and contribute. I want this to be a two-way discussion, but I'm more than happy to show you lots of bits and pieces at the same time. I mentioned that once it's set up, you would get a notification in your team. So I decided I was going to send that into my primary demo team. And then over here, if I was a pupil or a teacher, and at the moment I'm logged in as a teacher, but the pupil view isn't that different for this part of it, I would see down here, I can get a notification in my post. I've got a scheduled meeting for tomorrow, which really means I've got a scheduled distance learning lesson. It's for Oak class because, let's say, instead of this being a primary demo class, this was Oak class. And I know as a pupil that I'm going to join for an hour of maths. And all I need to do for getting to that, it's pretty easy. I don't have to even go to my calendar as a pupil. All I do is go to my classroom where I know it's a nice, friendly place. My teacher's been talking to me here in posts, and I click the link, and all of a sudden the video meeting launches, and I'm in there and I'm having a discussion, and I can join in actively on that. It is very non-threatening, and it's very easy to work with the people that are there in distance to click that. And I might be broadcasting at the same time where I've got the camera on, I've got my desktop computer with a webcam on top of the monitor, or I've got a laptop like I am at the moment, and then people can see what I'm saying, they can see what I'm doing. I'm not disclosing too much from a safeguarding or a GDPR point of view, because I would always recommend that the web camera is pointing towards the wall behind so that you're not seeing the other pupils in the class, and you haven't disclosed anything about those pupils or the school setting that they're in. You're keeping them safe, but the pupils that are at home are in a very safe scenario too. I discussed at the beginning about using this not just for teaching and learning, but to use this for pastoral and mental well-being. Another use that I have worked with schools on is to have meeting appointments, and then over here in the calendar, instead of it being formal 1 hours, you could get yourself a slot where you came in and you worked with your teacher for a half hour. And it might be that you've got a group of pupils that have similar pastoral needs, or you're working with them as an intervention, or you know that they're really struggling with being in isolation for 2 weeks while they're waiting for their COVID results to come through. And you can set up those, it could be daily mental well-being classes, or it could be that you're just touching with them every other day. But it doesn't have to be that Teams is just used for the business of education. It's used for all those other purposes as well. I frequently work with schools who want to get it set up for governing bodies now, because they've realised that they've got governors that are working in their own careers, or they've got families at home with their own unique reasons that they can't come into central meetings, or the risk assessment in school says that we aren't going to be having any excessive numbers of visitors beyond the people that need to be here for the business of education and school. So having all those governors coming together makes that the governing body still effective. You're still getting governance of the school, or you're still getting a trust board working together, but you're doing it in a different way. It's just far easier to connect over those that medium of Teams rather than it is to have them face to face. I'm going to pop back into my class team, and we said that we would look at the different features within Teams next to understand how they could be used to foster that distance or remote learning. And I firmly believe that posts is a key driver. Mine's a bit littered because I've been using it with lots of different schools and lots of different training sessions, and you can see some of my colleagues working in the demo accounts there have put in test meetings. But it doesn't have to be just boring announcements. As some of you will know, down at the bottom here, when you make a new announcement, if you press the letter with the brush next to it, you can get into full editing mode. I'm just going to minimize everybody else there on the side, and that gives you quite a bit of scope as to what you want to put in here. When you first introduce people to Teams, if you are not somebody who naturally finds technology easy to engage with, if you are a younger pupil, and in the UK you might be in year 1 or 2, it can be really, really complicated just to get on a computer and having got the thing switched on and put your password in to get into it, let alone then having to navigate Teams. I understand that. I used to be a teacher myself. So you want to make it as straightforward as possible and the minimum amount of clicks. If you can set up for them a shortcut and encourage the parents to shortcut in the web browser the Teams login for Office 365, so they log in, it's got their username and password in there if it's safe to do so in their household, they drop into Teams and they click on posts in their class, and then everything they are going to use is in their posts. And if I was communicating in a sort of Key Stage 1 scenario as it is in the UK, I probably wouldn't use much more than posts in the way of features in Teams, and I would get resources that I want across in that way. If you're an early years practitioner and you work in reception, I tend to rely upon the other products, specialist products you have available, whether it's something like Tapestry or to build a profile, because they are specific for recording early learning goals. I have used some schools that want to use Teams in early years. I have used. So here where you got the little animation, for instance, I've gone to Stream and I've recorded my video and I've done a pre-recorded input. And as a class teacher, I may have done something such as I've shown a fake activity table. I've set it up, and because I'm in a remote or distance learning scenario, I've set up an activity that could equally be done at home, just like it could in school. And maybe it's just using kitchen resources. So I'm going to ask, if you get 3 different size containers, so it could be a plastic kitchen jug, it could be a plastic beaker because we don't want any breakages and people to get cut, and it could be a plastic bowl, and we take the same volume of water and we just investigate what happens with that amount of water in those different shaped vessels. And I do a quick recording of me doing that using the webcam on my laptop, set it up as a table activity, I record it, and then using my post down here, it might be this is my daily activity, and that's all I want them to do in a distance learning scenario. And I can say what object holds water to be close to the top, making it up off the top of my head. And it's a simple one question for early years. The parents would be helping them because they're not going to be engaging on the laptop. I recorded my video. I go to Stream down here because Stream is embedded into my class team. And I haven't got any recorded videos here, but they appear as thumbnails so you can preview them. You can either search if you've got a lot in there, or you can click on the one you want, and then it gets embedded in here. If I wanted to put in such a YouTube clip or something from another web service like BBC Bite Size, I can always click the button here. I can either give it some text or I can just put the address in and I press insert and then the video appears underneath. And it could be me giving that input, it could be somebody else giving that input. And then I've got options to either get pupils to reply to me if I wanted parents to help me. And you would need to prep the parents for this and get the parents familiar with it too. So I can have everyone can reply, and then you get the reply button like up there. Or I might want them just to receive this and let me know what they've done in other ways. So only people that are moderators or teachers that are owners of these class teams can respond. So I can change the way that people interact with posts by choosing that there. I can either have this as a conversation with people that are in the team, or I can make it an announcement. If I want it to be an announcement, I can have a lovely headline, and that can have different coloured backgrounds, or I could choose my background to be nice and creative and upload there, or I can pick from the backgrounds that are provided by Microsoft. So it might be that I'm working in early year settings, so I want a nice friendly B. It's non-threatening. And I might say this is about shapes, because I'm looking at the shapes of containers. So I've got everything ready to go. That's fantastic. But I'm now an early years teacher, and maybe I'm an early years coordinator in my primary school, and I do not want to be sending this out individually and recreating this because I'm a form-entry primary school. Don't want to be doing that. Or I'm a secondary school and I've got 10 science sets. If this was a science experiment I'm setting up, I want to just post it once and be done with it. So I can go over here and post in multiple channels. I can select my channels, and don't want to put it in the staff team, I want to put it in my primary team. Well, I'm in there already. If I wanted to put it in my secondary team and say I want it to appear in the general channel of the secondary team, I press update, and then from a teacher perspective, I'm going to hit all of these different pupils in all of these different classes or sets, but they're going to get what they need from a distance learning scenario, whether they're in full lockdown or whether they're in a blended learning bubble. And I then send it and post it, and all I simply do is press post there. Out it goes to them. They all get it in their feed. They can see it. I know they've received it because as a teacher, I've chosen the correct different classes or sets that I want it to go to. It's in there as an announcement, so it's got the little microphone on the side to let them know it's an important announcement. It's got a tag on the side. If as a teacher I've messed something up or I've missed something, I can always go back in and edit it and delete it. So you've got ways to amend it. From a pupil perspective as well, you may have pupils with specific learning needs, and those learning needs are more straightforward to support if you've got them with you in class. But it can be a lot harder as a teacher to engage with them and support them effectively with remote learning across the internet if they're in teams. So you can get them to use Teams to help them. You could use Translator. So maybe you've got EAL pupils in the UK that have additional languages that they aren't native English speakers. Well, you can enable in your primary classroom to have the discussion there in another language. So it displays by using Translator in a different language if you've chosen a language. And in here at the moment, I haven't chosen another language, but we'll show you in a second how to do that. I can also enable an accessibility tool called Immersive Reader. We're going to have an entire session on this later on in the MIE course. Well, what it can do is amazing things, such as if I've got a pupil that has a low literacy level, particularly in early years, they can't read those words I've put on screen. How could I have that unreasonable expectation if they haven't got a parent present with them? Well, they could have it read to them. So you teach them, press the button, the immersive reader button, and they will get used to just having it read out to them. So there's lots of ways that they can get access to the learning if it's a remote learning scenario. You also, if you're going to go back and edit that post, I'm going to go back in and edit it now, might say that I want to attach a resource, and down here at the bottom I may say that I want to get a resource into the post. So if I'm not going to use any of the other features here in Teams, I could attach something from my OneDrive for those schools that are using OneDrive as your personal storage. So maybe you've got your planning and your daily resources in your OneDrive. Well, that's great. You can pick them up from there. You could also go and browse into other teams and channels that are in the school. If you've got a colleague that's produced something that's absolutely amazing and you know it's going to benefit you and save you time, but also it's going to enrich the learning for your class, you can dip into their team or their channel and pick up the resource from there and attach it. Or you can go the old-fashioned way. You can click upload from my computer, and what it would do is look at all the different folders in your computer, and you can dive in and you can pick up the file or the folders you want, and then just select them, and they would attach in here at the bottom. So you've got lots of different ways to get the resources across, even though pupils aren't there with you. But one consideration you need to think of when you're including any resources in Teams is if you're expecting the pupils to edit them, they need to be in a format that can be edited and saved and returned. And there are some amazing websites out there that produce resources for teachers and save hours and hours of time. But very often they can be in formats like PDF, or sometimes they can be in formats that you might use on an interactive whiteboard. You've got to think, what will the pupils have at home in a remote learning scenario? And could they edit this file and get it back to me with their work on it? And is it going to be a barrier to learning? If you know you've got very willing parents and they've got the ability to print a PDF and the pupil can write on it and then they can either snap a picture of it or scan it back in from their phone and put it back into the team, great. But we don't have many parents that have that luxury of time or even have those facilities at home, and it can be difficult for them to do so. And it can just another barrier for them getting work back to you or the child getting work back to you. So think, if I want the child to edit something, I need to make it easy for them. I need to make it quick and accessible. Any files that you upload into your posts will appear here in the Files tab. And in the Files tab, I've got some other files that I've been using. You can also upload other files, so files can have a dual purpose. So in my scenario, in my class team here for distance learning, one other way that I can get resources to pupils is to organise them either in weeks of learning in terms, or I can organise them in subjects, or if I'm in a secondary, I might say it's science, but then I'm going to organise them into chemistry, biology and physics, and then I might go even further still, and in biology I'm going to have cells and specialised cells. So it's up to you in your educational scenario as to how you organise your files, but it's a great way for self-service resources for pupils to come and pick them up and use them on their computer. But when they need to edit them, I spoke at the beginning of this presentation about Teams being that one-stop digital hub. Well, no longer do they have to worry about going up here and launching the app and finding the Word app and then having it as another tab at the top of the browser. It's just too cumbersome, and it's going to be one extra step to them not being successful. So they click on the file that they want. If it was maths, and then it opens up maths for them, remembering that if they're opening up from the files area, it's going to be a file that everybody's going to access and overwrite, so you need to make them aware of that and make the parents aware of that. But if they downloaded the copy and they're doing it at home, or they've stuck it in their own personal OneDrive, then fine, they won't overwrite each other's work. So in here I've put in maths today I would like, and then I explain what I'd like to do. But you'll notice that Word hasn't opened up separately. I've got all of the Word options I'd normally expect to find in the web app for Word, and they are there, but it's working inside of Teams. And as a pupil or even a member of staff, I haven't got to worry about going elsewhere. It opens up, I type straight into it, I would like you, let's say you to find shapes around the home, and list here. It's all going to be saved in real time because it's automatically saving to the cloud in Teams. And when I've finished, I don't have to worry about saving it or where do I save it to. I just press close. And then if this was my OneDrive, or if it's something we're collaborating on, because the files area is quite good for collaborating, it just saves straight in. And when I go back in as a teacher, if I wanted all of the people in my class to put it into one document, it's all going to be there together. If you're going to start getting them to save it to their OneDrive, that's something I don't normally get into until upper key stage 2 in the UK, so sort of year 5, 6. But they will get used to using their OneDrive. That's something you want to introduce, but otherwise keep them in Teams, because OneDrive is a separate area and there's no easy way to add OneDrive into Teams for all those pupils. The easiest way, if you did want to do it, is to press the plus button. And again, I said at the beginning about Teams being that hub for everything, and if you want to get other apps into Teams to save them having to navigate off, so let's say you did use Excel a lot, or you had pupils opening up Word to word process documents, you can pin them along the top of your team. And here are those other third-party apps that I spoke about earlier that you might want to go and pick up and plug in. So if you subscribe to a different platform, maybe it's Espresso Coding, Education City, or something like that, or Kahoot, you pick them up from there, and then when you've accepted them, they pin along the top. And you as a teacher can do that, but pupils can't. But again, it makes it nice and easy for them just to go along the top here and pick up different web platforms that you might want them to use, but they still stay in Teams. They don't have to go anywhere else. And in a remote learning scenario, keeping it as straightforward as possible is really, really important. Saving them have to have the trouble of going elsewhere is just one step less for them to have to undertake. Let's go back to posts. So posts build up and they become a conscious stream of the learning or the dialogue they've had with you as a class. If you do go back to a whole lockdown situation, if I scroll back in my my post stream, you could use this for pastoral learning as well. So you could say, look, remote learning today, welcome to Thursday. We're having a virtual class because, do you know what? We've had 10 cases, confirmed cases of COVID. My entire bubble's out. I'm not just going to use this for just the business of delivering lessons. I want people to have a starter activity in the morning. I want them to feel like they're walking into my main classroom. They've got a starter activity to be getting on with, but also I might have a pastoral orientated question there too. So it's thinking for you, how are you going to build that welcoming environment? How are you going to be inclusive of people, whichever scenario they're from? And post lends itself to doing that. If you suddenly needed or decided, and it was also approved by your school, you wanted to have a whole class meeting, all you need to do is hit the meet button up there and you can get on with the business of then having a meeting with the class. But do consider all the implications of having those meetings. And I can't emphasize enough, it's really important to set expectations before engaging, bringing pupils into Teams. Explain that you expect the same level of behavior in a virtual Teams classroom that you would in a physical classroom. Let parents know what their children are going to be doing and how they can support their pupils when they're coming in. It's even more important in the primary scenario in that phase than it is in secondary. Often once pupils get into secondary and they're students in secondary school, they're quite self-sufficient in doing that and using the features they got available to them, and they don't need that parental input. They probably frown upon it. The other areas that are quite useful, and I'll briefly cover these, for setting work in distance learning scenarios, posts is a great road in and getting pupils or students familiar with posts, and also getting staff familiar with posts if it's a staff team. If I quickly jump over into a staff team, you could say notices such as there's a whole staff meeting tonight, I want you to check the agenda, or I want you to read this policy before you get there. Another way with staff teams that you can get people engaging is by doing that, but you need to have a clearly defined policy for your communications in school, or between trust in the school, or between other schools that you collaborate with. What goes into a post? What goes into an email still? You need to establish that. Otherwise, people tend to get weighty things coming in posts and they end up collapsed, and you need to expand it to see more, and it doesn't quite work. So keeping short, punchy pieces of information in posts that doesn't go on too long is the best use of posts. And if it's something that's weightier, or it's going to have a big explanation in it, well, that goes by email. And establish those rules and remind people of those rules, because otherwise people moan Teams isn't working for me, or I get information lost, or a message has collapsed and I didn't expand it, so I didn't see the important bit down below. Well, that's because people are misusing it and not thinking about how the platform is set up and the best way to get it across. And particularly if you're working with a staff team that's had to lock down in a school as a local lockdown, you're not in there. You want people to see information that's important to them. And it being hidden in collapsed messages isn't helpful. One of the other ways that you can aid communication in remote situations is that you can have dedicated channels for staff teams. So you can see here, I'm using the general channel as the whole staff channel. You could have a separate whole staff channel, but as Microsoft provides you with a general channel in every team, I normally utilize it in that way. Join all of my staff in there, regardless of their role in school, whether they're on the admin team, they work in the offices, they're in the business of teaching, or the support staff. Bring everyone in there, because the general channel is about inclusivity. But then I might have other sub channels down here on the side that are just for specific teams or roles. So I might have a business manager channel where I've got the head or the principal along with the finance team, and they're in there. The office admin team could be in another one. And if I'm posting in those channels, as you'll see, I may have made a post there about budget, but nobody else is going to see that in the general channel, because that is ring fenced and it's private. There's a padlock showing me that channel is private, and only the people that are members or owners of that channel would then see that. So you can divvy up your communication. You can be really targeted with what people see or what they don't see, or the files they have available to them. So I might drop into the files section of the business manager channel the budget or the forecast, or how much you're spending on hand gels and paper towels in COVID, because they need to know that, and we need to make sure there's enough of it coming in. But everybody else doesn't need to know that, so that's not available. If I was in the files section of the general channel, people wouldn't see that. But there's other things that are in there, such as the COVID briefing, or maybe advice on policies or procedures, and that's quite right to drop into the communication, the file section for that. So files are a great way to collaborate. And if you wanted to have a lot of people in there in the daily COVID briefing, for instance, and you had lots of staff all working on their own, they're typing in here, or someone's typing in minutes, they can all be doing that in real time, and they can be working on the one document, which means you haven't got to worry about having different versions of documents stuck on separate laptops or different areas or on the server. It can all just be in Teams, and everyone knows where it is, and they can get access from anywhere, because all you have to do is log into a device with an internet connection and you browse to the Files tab. I'm going to jump back over to Classroom Teams. Another feature that's really useful is assignments. You can use OneNote Class Notebook. That's another MIE session I'll be running later on in the month. So if you want to know more about OneNote and its uses and its benefits, come along to that session. But we're going to focus on assignments for the latter half of this session. Assignments best suit using remote learning for setting homeworks or pieces of work that could be a project that needs to be returned after a set defined period. You can see here I've got some pieces already set. So it might be around story starters. I've tagged that to show my pupils that it's about writing. So this is an English scenario in a primary school. You can tag it in any way you want. It just gives clarity. You can subdivide a subject. This is a teacher view at the moment. In here I can see the pupils that I've included. You can have a whole class, or you can have separate pupils. It's up to you. If you want to see how that looks as a pupil, this is how it is from a pupil perspective. I've got the title. Here are my really simple instructions. There is the resource that I've attached. They can access their own copy of the resource. They can't overwrite each other's. And in this situation, I'm deciding not to use points. I'm going to come back out of that. And If I wanted to go in and re-edit it, I hit edit assignment and I'm going to come back out. But if I wanted to create a new one, I can create quizzes or I can create assignments, and quizzes are great for consolidating or checking learning. Useful for if you want to, in a distance learning way, set a test or an exam, you can achieve it through that. But more than likely, you're going to use this for assignments, and assignments are quite useful in themselves. So let's go ahead and mock one up. Come into the assignment, you give it a title. So this might be maths, and let's continue the theme of shape. I give it instructions, so maybe I want to, let's say that's 3D shape. Maybe I want to know the features of a 3D shape. So how many vertices, how many edges, how many faces, and so forth. I add them in there. I could add a resource, and in the same way that I added resources in posts, it links into my OneDrive, or I can link to my computer, or I can go into other teams and pick up resources from colleagues that have already made a resource. I don't want to recreate it. I can give points. So if it was 10 questions on shape, I might say there's 10 points available. I can also have things called rubrics. Rubrics are, for people that are joining me from the UK, you think of them as learning objectives and breaking those down into success criteria. And once you've made them, you can then go back in and reuse them, or you can make new rubrics. So if I went for lines of symmetry and shape, because I've used that before, and here it's levels of challenge. So that might be mild, spicy, hot, extra hot. You don't have to use obvious words that are going to affect the esteem of pupils. Here we've got take an extra look, improving, good or excellent, which is more of educational terms that we use in the UK to assess progress. I want to know about the success they're going to have about identifying lines of symmetry in the shape, and they get very clear descriptions about what I'm expecting to see from them. So you can be very clear and transparent, and then I just attach that to my assignment that I'm setting, and in here I would go and say find features in the shape. Just going to do it as quick today just so I can end it, and that's in there for me. I can decide which classes I want to post to. So at the moment, I'm going to put it into just my primary classroom. I want to set it in my secondary classroom as well. I could also decide which students I'm going to give it to. So if I don't want to give it to all pupils, they don't have to be. I could also add pupils in from there, give it a time and a date it's due in, and then I can either save it. And if I save it, it's not seen by the pupils or students. I can come back and edit it as a teacher. Maybe I'm job sharing and I need to get the input of my colleague, or I can just go ahead and assign it. And if I assign it, it will instantly appear for everyone, the teacher and the pupils, and then they will get notified in the posts that they've got an assignment. There it is. So that distance learning communication, they get the notification that comes up there. So that's what I meant about banners earlier, depending on how you want to be notified. It's also a notification there in my post. So although I'm not in class with my teacher, because I've got used to looking at my posts, I know I've got an assignment, and I just have to click on view assignment there. And I don't even have to worry about navigating over there to assignments. Pupils would see assignments only, but as a teacher, I also see grades. And I'll show you how grades interface into this in a bit. And when I get work returned by pupils or students, none of my demo students have been that good so far, it would appear down here, and then I can get onto the business of marking it. So if it was a normal situation, you can go ahead and have a set of books, take them home and mark them. But here, you haven't got those books. You can get the work that's been returned. So here is an assignment about STEM and planes. I can say, actually, you got 15 of the points available. I want to go and see the work. So as a teacher, I haven't got to go elsewhere. It's straightforward for me. I either would go into here. My people, in theory, have handed in a piece of work, so I'm waving the cursor around and there's that funny picture of a ring-bound books and pens. Their work would appear there, whether it's their PowerPoint or their Word document. It's for Sydney. I can put in some comments which hopefully aren't as brash and a bit more constructive in the feedback. I give them their points and I return that back to Sydney. And when it returns back to them, that's a one-to-one feedback to them, but I could also move between different pupils and students as well. And I could give them their feedback too to make it quicker and easier for me. earlier. I'm not in a pupil view here, and for time I won't cross log in, but they would open up their work when they got it delivered to them. They would work here, they wouldn't see the feedback and the point boxes on the side, and there'd be a button up the top there saying return, and they would return the work into me, and I get notified that the work has been returned to me. So over here where I was in for 3D shape, it says not handed in. It says viewed if they've gone and viewed it at one point, or it says handed in if they've returned it to me. I can also give feedback from in here as well. The feedback's one-to-one, so the other pupils don't see it. It doesn't appear in the post feed for them, so you don't have to worry about a pupil being embarrassed by something, or if they've had feedback and they got something wrong, it's personal to them. You can also give points in there too. So if you are using Teams for remote learning, assignments is really key for setting either pieces of homework or pieces of distance learning work that you might have some topic work that you're doing, or a larger piece of project work. Well, it's a great vehicle to achieving that. And if you want to, at the end of the day, get all of that information out of Teams, it's not just stuck in there. You can export it on a spreadsheet as a teacher. If you are working over here in your grade book, you want to track the progress, but you got to import it into another MIS or assessment system, you can export your gradebook as a spreadsheet from there, and then you can drop those marks in there, or they can be a reminder to you if you're assessing progress in different ways for the school assessment system. So there's lots of different ways of achieving that at the same time. Just going to pop in and see if there's any questions that have come in there so far. Mrs. Blake, you've asked a question. Hopefully I've just answered that for you. Sorry, I didn't see that earlier, about 10 minutes ago. But yes, you can achieve that for assignments and posts. It's just sometimes in some situations the assignments would be too overwhelming because of the age of the pupil, or you haven't a chance to expose them to that. So gradually introducing assignments, but assignments is the vehicle for that at the same time. Does anybody else have any questions relating to that before I move into the second half of the presentation, or the final bit of the presentation? Feel free to unmute if you don't want to type into the chat. Do you have to set up grades? So grades in themselves at the moment are numeric. In one of the future updates, Microsoft has alluded to the fact that grades will be alphanumeric. Yes, you do have to set up the grades to get them in there, so you know the grading structure you're using. I have a long list of assignments. Can we hide them? So if you've got a long list of assignments and they've been returned, then they normally drop off the bottom. If you've got them all there and they're still active, then you don't. You can, Hannah, you can just give written feedback if you wish. You don't have to give points. So absolutely, when you come into your, if I go back over to assignments, when you come back into your assignments, if they've been returned, they drop off the bottom and you don't see all those assignments there. But I went in to edit this. Well, I've given it 10 points. If I deleted it and said no points whatsoever, then that just doesn't populate and you don't need to worry about points. I use points sparingly, and I certainly wouldn't use them all of the time, because they become, in some circumstances for pupils, they become very demotivating and they find it hard that they're not getting the amount of points available, or they're not getting all the questions correct. So use them when you think it's appropriate. Also, if you're using it maybe for an intervention group, because you can set up an assignment not for the whole class, but if you had maybe a gifted and talented group you wanted to extend, or you've got a group that maybe are struggling with the concept of the learning that they're currently undertaking, you can do that too. So there's lots of different ways to use the assignments so that you can be targeted with the assignments. Can assignments be reordered, or must they always stay in date order? At the moment, they only stay in date order, Paul. I haven't seen a way of reordering them into such as subjects or by name of assignment. They just appear on screen by the date that you set them. Any other questions, Mrs. Blair? How do they become inactive? Assignments become inactive when they've been returned and all the pupils have returned them in the class. You can do it that way. That's the easiest way to make them inactive. Or you can just remove the assignment if you want to get rid of it at the same time. If you build up your repertoire of assignments, you can reuse them, or colleagues and other classes can reuse them. So I always encourage staff, if you know that one person is teaching a certain unit and this works really nicely in secondary. If I was in science and maybe I'm teaching a forces topic or something to my year nines, and my other colleague's going to be doing year nines forces next term, but I've already done all the assignments for it. Well, write the assignments and help each other out and go and pick up each other's assignments and then just tweak them for your class depending on the level of ability of pupils in your class. You can delay when assignments go live. So at the moment, there's no way to schedule when they go live, but you save them and then I just assign them when I want them to go live. And before I save them, I save the date and the time that I want them to be available, Mrs. Matthews, when it comes to it. And then they just become available to the students when I make them assigned, and they're private to me while they're still saved, and I can go ahead and do that. If you delete an assignment, does it delete the work from the child's notebook? So assignments are separate to the notebook. So OneNote class notebook doesn't interface in that way with assignments. So the assignment work is separate. And if you delete the assignments from memory, and I would need to go and check that myself, I believe that the work still stays for the student and doesn't go. It's the assignment that goes, but I would need to double check that. Any other questions on assignments? Anyone wants to drop into chats? No? Okay. I am just going to pop back over to the presentation then and reshare that screen. Okay. We have almost reached the end of our session, but just to conclude and bring everything together, we, at the same time as looking at the whole school teaching to discover the pastoral teaching, the elements there, the remote sessions and the posts and the files and the assignments are also tools in your arsenal. And I wouldn't advise attempting remote learning just by trying to hold meetings alone. It can be quite onerous on you, but also often you get a lot of questions that could be more easily explained by setting an assignment with a resource in it, or making a post linking to the website where they could see something visually, or sharing a picture, because a picture is worth 1,000 words, as they say. So think about those different tools you've got available to you and when it's the correct time to do it. There's also Microsoft remote learning resources and guides for any of the schools in the UK that have been through the DFE project. You will have got some handover guides in there for pupils and also for parents that help them navigate teams. It will give them diagrams such as these. So if you are going to use Microsoft Teams for remote learning, it's important that they know for orientation what all those buttons do around the screen. I know a lot of you that have joined today's session are more familiar now than you've ever been with Teams, but people that see it for the first time, it can be a bit bewildering as to where all those go. So those sort of online guides have those annotated views there. Also for class teams, it can be useful for parents. It could also be useful for pupils to know where to go when they get inside of their class team. And if they press a button, it's not the end of the world. If they need to do something, which button do I press to change something or access a resource? Or sometimes parents or even pupils get scared of, what do I do if I press the ellipsis ... dots on something? Is it going to affect my work? Is it going to delete it for someone else? Or am I going to post something and look silly because someone else is going to see? So helping them in advance. And that's what I meant about not only setting expectations, but also reaching out, so that if you end up in a remote learning situation or a blended learning situation, that people are battle ready. They know how to use the platform you're providing and how to get in. The stream recordings, I think I covered this earlier, but you've got free education access to that as long as you're using Office 365 for education, which I would imagine most people that are on this session are. You've got quite a big limit for your videos in there, the 50 gigabytes per video. So you have to be recording for quite a long time to fill that up, and also get in and fill that and get into that library then and sift your videos and make them available to everyone else. There's lots of courses on the Microsoft Education Center, which you signed up to at the beginning, and I will give you your code in just a bit, to undertake if you want to find out more. So there's 3 courses there. There's also a Teams directory that's really useful to go to. It's like a Bible, and if you want to do something in Teams and if you don't quite know how to do it, it's got a search feature in there. I use it quite a bit still. It's always updated because Teams is always evolving, so it's another one. And also We will come back and have that session on OneNote. But if you want to know about OneNote Class Notebook in advance, there's a whole guide section to that. I've mentioned several times that we're going to have other sessions on these different aspects. So today you're on the remote learning session. Next time I'll be delivering next week a session on OneNote Class Notebook specifically because it's such a big area of Teams on its own. Then we'll have a look at things like Microsoft Learning Tools, which is one of them is Immersive Reader, which I showed you a little bit of earlier. And then finally, we'll have another session at the end of October on Flipgrid. So if you want to come and join in any of those, all you need to do is sign up using the link that we used before. So what I am going to do is just stop sharing my screen a moment and also stop the recording. I'm going to share the redeem code that you